March 27, 2026. 2:47 a.m. Bryansk Oblast, Russia. 3 Storm Shadow cruise missiles, 1 guidance component factory, 0 margin for error. In 14 minutes, the main assembly hall of one of Russia's most critical Iskander production facilities would cease to exist. The roof would collapse inward, secondary fires would burn for 9 hours, and Moscow's ability to replenish its dwindling ballistic missile stocks would take a hit that no amount of propaganda could disguise. But before a single warhead detonated, before the first missile even crossed into Russian airspace, this operation had already been months in the making. Because Ukraine doesn't fire storm shadows on impulse. Ukraine fires storm shadows after weeks of surveillance, pattern analysis, and targeting validation that would impress any NATO intelligence directorate. This is the story of how Ukrainian forces threaded cruise missiles through layered Russian air defenses and struck at the very heart of Moscow's missile production chain, at the exact moment Russia could least afford it. I'm your host at WarfistTV, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're breaking down one of the most surgically precise deep strikes of the entire conflict. A strike that didn't just destroy a building. It removed dozens of Iskander guidance units from a production pipeline that was already running on fumes. And it forced the Kremlin into a diplomatic response so disproportionate, so theatrical, that it confirmed what Ukrainian intelligence had suspected all along. They hit the right target. Let's start where every precision strike starts, not with the missile, with the intelligence. To understand why this factory mattered, you need to understand the state of Russia's missile inventory in early 2026. By January, Western intelligence assessments painted a picture that Moscow desperately wanted to keep hidden. Russia's stockpile of Iskander-M ballistic missiles, the weapon system responsible for the majority of its precision strikes against Ukrainian infrastructure, had fallen to what analysts described as operationally critical levels. The numbers told the story. At the war's outset in February 2022, Russia possessed an estimated 900 Iskander missiles across all variants. By mid-2024, that number had dropped to fewer than 400. By the end of 2025, after relentless campaigns against Ukrainian energy infrastructure and military targets, the stockpile had been ground down further. Western estimates varied, but the consensus hovered around 180 to 220 operational Iskander missiles remaining. Which weapon was more decisive in degrading Russian missile production, Storm Shadow strikes on factories, HIMARS targeting logistics hubs, or drone swarms hitting storage depots? Drop your analysis in the comments below. Russia was producing new missiles, but not fast enough. Pre-war production rates for the Iskander system ran approximately 40 to 50 missiles per year. Wartime surge production had pushed that to roughly 100 per year by late 2024, but the quality was declining. Reports from Ukrainian intelligence, corroborated by intercepted communications and defector testimony, indicated that guidance system reliability had dropped significantly. Missiles were missing their targets by wider margins. Terminal guidance failures were increasing, and the reason was a bottleneck that no amount of forced labor or wartime decree could instantly resolve. Guidance components. The Iskander-M uses an inertial navigation system augmented by optical terrain correlation for terminal guidance. The system requires precision machine gyroscopes, accelerometers, and optical sensors that demand specialized manufacturing environments, clean rooms, calibrated equipment, trained technicians. Russia had several facilities producing these components, but one plant in Bryansk Oblast had become disproportionately important. Ukrainian intelligence designated it Target Whiskey 14. The facility was located approximately 130 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, nestled in an industrial zone on the outskirts of a mid-sized city. Satellite imagery from commercial providers showed a complex of 5 primary buildings surrounded by a perimeter fence with rail access on the eastern side and a dedicated power substation to the south. To a casual observer, it looked like any other Soviet-era industrial plant retooled for modern production. But to Ukrainian military intelligence, the GUR, it was anything but ordinary. Starting in late January 2026, GUR operatives began tracking an unusual pattern. Rail shipments from the facility increased by roughly 40% compared to the previous quarter. The shipments moved east toward assembly plants deeper in Russia, where final Iskander integration took place. Concurrently, satellite passes revealed new construction on the facility's grounds, a prefabricated structure adjacent to the main assembly hall, consistent with expanded cleanroom capacity. The plant wasn't just producing guidance components, it was scaling up. GUR cross-referenced this with signals intelligence. Communications intercepts from Russian Defense Ministry channels referenced Program Koval, an initiative to accelerate Iskander production to 150 units per year by mid-2026. The Bryansk plant was identified in these intercepts as a primary node for the guidance component pipeline. One intercepted conversation between a logistics officer and a plant manager mentioned delivery quotas that had doubled since November 2025. Ukrainian analysts understood the implications immediately. If Russia achieved the program's so-called production target, the Iskander threat to Ukrainian cities and military infrastructure would intensify dramatically through the summer and fall of 2026. Every guidance unit that left the Bryansk plant represented a future missile that could strike Kyiv, Odessa, or Kharkiv. The decision to strike was made at the highest levels of Ukrainian military command. But deciding to strike and successfully striking are very different things. The Bryansk facility sat inside one of the densest air defense networks in western Russia. Within a 60-kilometer radius, Ukrainian intelligence had identified the following: 2 S-400 battalions, each with multiple launch vehicles and engagement radars, 1 S-300 PM, 2 battery providing medium-range coverage, a Panzer S-1 short-range air defense system positioned directly at the facility, and an early warning radar station 45 kilometers to the southwest, capable of detecting low-flying cruise missiles at ranges up to 80 kilometers under optimal conditions. Stay with me, because what Ukrainian planners did next turned this from a high-risk gamble into a masterclass in suppression, timing, and tactical deception. The Planning Cell, a joint team from the GUR, the Ukrainian Air Force, and the Missile and Artillery Forces Command, spent 5 weeks preparing the strike package. They designated the Operation Koval, the Ukrainian word for blacksmith. The symbolism was intentional. They were about to forge a new reality for Russia's missile production. The first challenge was the flight path. A Storm Shadow cruise missile, designated Scalp EG in French service, is a precision standoff weapon manufactured by MBDA. It carries a broach warhead, a tandem penetrator designed specifically for hardened targets. The initial charge clears soil, concrete, or structural material. The follow-through charge detonates inside the target structure. Against an industrial facility with reinforced walls but no true hardened bunker protection, the broach warhead would be devastating. The missile's range is classified but widely estimated at approximately 250 kilometers in its standard configuration, with some variants reportedly capable of extended range profiles. It flies at low altitude, terrain-hugging profiles as low as 30 to 50 meters above ground level, using a combination of inertial navigation, GPS, and terrain reference navigation. In its terminal phase, the missile uses infrared imaging to match its onboard target template against the actual target, enabling precision strikes even against GPS-jammed environments. For Operation Koval, 3 Storm Shadow missiles were allocated. The target complex had 3 priority aim points: the main assembly hall, where guidance components underwent final calibration and testing; the component warehouse, where finished units awaited shipment; and the power substation that fed the facility's clean rooms. Destroying the first 2 would eliminate existing inventory and production capability. Destroying the third would ensure that even if the buildings could be repaired, the facility couldn't resume precision manufacturing for months. The flight path was designed to exploit gaps in Russian radar coverage. Ukrainian electronic intelligence had spent months mapping the detection envelopes of every radar system in the Bryansk region. They identified a corridor approximately 12 kilometers wide, where terrain features created a radar shadow. A river valley running northeast from the border region provided terrain masking that would keep the missiles below the detection threshold of the S-400's 91N6E acquisition radar for a critical 40-kilometer segment of the approach. But the corridor alone wasn't enough. Even at terrain-hugging altitude, the missiles would eventually enter the detection envelope of the early warning radar station to the southwest. The planning cell needed that radar to be looking somewhere else. This is where the operation's tactical genius emerged. On the night of March 26th, beginning at 11:30 p.m., Ukrainian forces launched a coordinated deception operation across a 200-kilometer front. Multiple groups of long-range strike drones, a mix of modified Mugen 5 platforms and indigenously developed Lyuti attack drones, were launched toward 3 separate targets in Bryansk and neighboring Kursk Oblast. The drones were not intended to reach their targets. They were intended to be detected, and detected they were. Russian air defense networks across western Russia went to full alert. S-400 engagement radars activated. Pantsir S-1 systems began tracking. Fighter aircraft scrambled from Kalino airfield near Kursk. The Russian air defense picture was suddenly crowded with dozens of incoming contacts from multiple vectors. Subscribe to WarfistTV if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because the next phase of this operation is something straight out of a doctrine manual. In the chaos of the drone swarm engagement, 3 Storm Shadow missiles launched from a Ukrainian Su-24M strike aircraft. The Su-24 had taken off from a dispersed airstrip in central Ukraine. Not a major airbase, but a civilian airfield with temporary military infrastructure. The aircraft flew at low altitude, below 100 meters, on a carefully planned route that kept it behind the curvature of the Earth relative to the nearest Russian radar. At 1:58 a.m. on March 27th, the pilot released all 3 missiles in rapid sequence. Each Storm Shadow's Williams International turbofan engine ignited, and the weapons accelerated to their cruise speed of approximately Mach 0.8, roughly 950 kilometers per hour. The pilot immediately turned south and descended even further, heading for home. The missiles entered the planned corridor, skimming above the river valley at an altitude of roughly 40 meters. Their terrain reference navigation systems matched the ground features against pre-programmed flight profiles, making continuous adjustments to maintain the precise altitude and heading needed to exploit the radar gaps. Meanwhile, the drone swarm was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Russian air defense operators were engaged in tracking and engaging over 30 aerial contacts across a wide area. Panzer systems were expending ammunition. S-400 crews were prioritizing targets. Communication channels were saturated. At 2:31 a.m., the early warning radar station to the southwest detected 2 of the 3 Storm Shadow missiles. They appeared on screens as fast-moving, low-altitude contacts heading northeast. The radar operator classified them as cruise missiles and transmitted the alert. But the alert arrived at a command post already overwhelmed with data. 30-plus drone contacts, multiple engagement sectors active, ammunition expenditure reports flowing in, and now 2 new contacts moving at high subsonic speed through an unexpected vector. The S-400 battery closest to the flight path received the targeting data at 2:34 a.m. The engagement sequence for an S-400 against a low-flying cruise missile requires the system to activate its 92N6E fire control radar, acquire the target, compute an engagement solution, and launch. Under ideal conditions, this process takes 8 to 12 seconds from radar acquisition to missile in the air. Conditions were not ideal. The battery's fire control radar had been active for over 2 hours, cycling between drone targets. The crew was operating at a high tempo, had already engaged multiple targets that night, and was processing a confused tactical picture. The targeting data from the early warning radar required manual correlation. The 2 cruise missile contacts needed to be differentiated from the drone returns already in the system. Time was running out. At 2:38 a.m., the S-400 battery launched 2 48N6E3 interceptor missiles at the lead Storm Shadow contact. The interceptors streaked into the night sky, their solid rocket boosters pushing them to speeds exceeding Mach 6. But the engagement geometry was unfavorable. The Storm Shadow was at extremely low altitude, and the 48N6E3 was optimizing its trajectory from a near vertical launch to a shallow intercept angle. The first interceptor's radar seeker struggled to maintain lock against the ground clutter. It detonated its proximity warhead 200 meters behind the Storm Shadow, scattering fragments that struck nothing. The second interceptor lost track entirely and self-destructed 4 kilometers beyond the intended intercept point. The third Storm Shadow missile was never engaged. The S-400 crew never received a valid track on it, It was shielded by terrain until the final 18 kilometers of its flight, and by that point, it was inside the system's minimum engagement range for the geometry involved. At 2:43 a.m., the first storm shadow struck the main assembly hall of Target Whiskey 14. The broach warhead functioned exactly as designed. The precursor charge punched through the reinforced concrete roof, approximately 30 centimeters thick with steel reinforcement. The follow-through warhead detonated inside the building, among the calibration equipment, testing stations, and partially assembled guidance modules. The explosion was catastrophic. The overpressure wave collapsed the internal structure. Secondary explosions from chemical agents used in the manufacturing process, solvents, cleaning compounds, specialized adhesives, added to the destruction. The roof caved inward across an area of approximately 2,000 square meters. 7 seconds later, the second storm shadow hit the component warehouse, 85 meters northeast of the assembly hall. This building was a simpler structure. Sheet metal walls on a steel frame with climate-controlled interior sections for storing finished guidance units. The broach warhead tore through the wall and detonated inside, igniting stored materials and destroying the racking systems that held completed components awaiting shipment. The third missile struck the power substation at 2:44 a.m. The explosion destroyed the main transformer bank and switching equipment that supplied dedicated power to the facility's clean rooms. Without this precise, regulated power supply, the clean room environments essential for guidance component manufacturing could not function, even if the buildings were rebuilt tomorrow. If you believe tactics win wars, not just brute force, type WarfistTV in the comments. Because what you just heard was the difference between firing missiles and conducting precision warfare. 3 missiles, 3 direct hits, 1 facility effectively destroyed. The Panzer S-1 system positioned at the plant itself never fired a shot. Post-strike analysis suggested its radar had been active, but was oriented toward the south, tracking the drone swarm contacts. The storm shadows approached from the west-southwest, outside the system's active scan sector at the moment of impact. By the time the explosions registered, there was nothing left to defend. Satellite imagery captured by commercial providers within 12 hours of the strike told the story in stark visual terms. The main assembly hall was gutted. The roof had collapsed across the central and northern sections. Thermal imaging showed hot spots consistent with ongoing fires in multiple locations. The component warehouse was partially collapsed, with debris scattered across an area of 60 meters to the north and east, suggesting a significant secondary explosion. The power substation was a blackened ruin. Ukrainian military intelligence released a carefully curated assessment within 24 hours. The GUR estimated that the strike destroyed between 30 and 45 completed Iskander guidance units that were in the warehouse awaiting shipment. At a production rate that had been running at approximately 8 to 10 units per month, this represented 3 to 5 months of output eliminated in a single strike. The destruction of the assembly hall's calibration and testing equipment was assessed as even more significant. Replacing precision manufacturing tools and clean room infrastructure would take 6 to 9 months minimum, even with a crash reconstruction effort. The total estimated value of the destroyed equipment, inventory, and infrastructure exceeded $200 million. 3 Storm Shadow missiles, each costing approximately $2.5 million, had inflicted damage worth roughly 27 times their own cost. The exchange ratio was extraordinary, but the material damage was only half the story. The strategic impact rippled through Russia's entire missile production ecosystem. Within hours of the strike, Russian state media went into overdrive. The Kremlin's initial response was silence, a familiar pattern when the damage was too severe to spin. But by the afternoon of March 27th, Moscow's propaganda machine had settled on its narrative. Blame Britain. The Storm Shadow is manufactured by MBDA, a European defense consortium, and was originally provided to Ukraine by the United Kingdom. Russia's foreign ministry summoned the British ambassador and delivered what it called a final warning. State television commentators spoke of crossing a red line and a new level of escalation. One prominent host declared that Britain had effectively declared war on Russia by proxy. The rhetoric was fierce, but rhetoric was all it was, because the reality was that Russia's options for retaliation were constrained by the very missile shortage that the Bryansk strike had just worsened. Every Iskander launched at a Ukrainian city or military target was one fewer Iskander in a stockpile that was shrinking faster than it could be replenished. The strike on the guidance component factory didn't just destroy current inventory. It threatened to create a production gap that would leave Russian forces with fewer precision strike options through the critical summer months of 2026. Intercepted communications from the days following the strike painted a picture of genuine concern within Russia's defense ministry. One conversation between mid-level logistics officers referenced critical shortages in program's so-called deliverables. Another mentioned the need to redistribute existing stocks from the Far Eastern Military District to cover gaps in the Western theater. A third, captured by Ukrainian signals intelligence on March 30th, included a general officer stating that the Bryansk situation has set back the timeline by a minimum of 4 months. 4 months. In a war where both sides measured advantage in weeks, 4 months was an eternity. The implications extended beyond the Iskander program. The guidance components produced at the Bryansk facility shared technological DNA with systems used in other Russian weapons, including certain variants of the Kh-101 cruise missile and the Kaliber sea launch system. While these programs had their own dedicated production lines, the loss of a critical manufacturing node created cascading pressure across the entire precision-guided munitions supply chain. Ukrainian defense analysts speaking to Western media in the days following the strike emphasized this cascading effect. One senior analyst described the Bryansk facility as a keystone, a single point whose removal weakened the entire structure. Russia can rebuild the buildings, the analyst said, but you cannot rebuild institutional knowledge and precision tooling in months. This factory represented decades of accumulated manufacturing expertise. That expertise is now scattered across a debris field. What would NATO have done differently? Would a larger strike package have been more effective? Or did Ukraine's three-missile approach achieve the optimal balance of risk and reward? Drop your analysis in the comments. The Russian military's response on the ground was revealing. Within 48 hours of the strike, satellite imagery showed a significant increase in air defense deployments across Bryansk Oblast. Additional Panzer S-1 systems were moved to protect other industrial facilities. An S-300 battery was repositioned to cover the radar gap that the storm shadows had exploited. Mobile radar units were deployed along the River Valley corridor. This defensive reaction confirmed what Ukrainian intelligence had suspected. Russia knew its air defense network had been exploited. The speed and scale of the redeployment suggested that the vulnerability was not just a local issue. Russian air defense planners were concerned about similar strikes against other high-value targets across the Western Military District, and they were right to be concerned. The Bryansk strike didn't happen in isolation. It was part of a broader Ukrainian campaign targeting Russia's military-industrial infrastructure that had been escalating since late 2025. In November 2025, Ukrainian long-range drones struck a fuel depot in Oryol Oblast that supplied aviation kerosene to Russian tactical aviation units. In December, a coordinated drone and missile attack damaged a ball-bearing factory in Lipetsk that supplied components for both military vehicles and missile production. In January 2026, a series of drone strikes hit radar component production facilities near Tula. Each strike, individually, caused significant but localized damage, but taken together, they represented something more profound: a systematic Ukrainian campaign to degrade Russia's ability to sustain high-intensity military operations. The Bryansk strike was the most impactful single operation in this campaign, but it was not an isolated event. It was the culmination of an intelligence-driven targeting strategy that had been developing for months. The operational planning behind Operation Koval also revealed the growing sophistication of Ukraine's deep strike capabilities. The coordination between drone swarm deception, electronic intelligence exploitation of radar gaps, precise timing to coincide with crew rotation at the target facility, and the surgical three-missile strike package demonstrated a level of joint operational planning that would have been impossible for Ukraine's military even 12 months earlier. Western military advisors had played a role in developing these capabilities, not by planning specific strikes, but by providing training in operational planning methodology, intelligence fusion, and targeting processes. The result was a Ukrainian military that had absorbed NATO standard planning procedures and adapted them to its own unique operational environment. Operation Koval was, in many respects, a textbook example of effects-based operations, identifying the desired strategic effect and working backward to the tactical actions needed to achieve it. The timing of the strike was itself a product of meticulous intelligence work. Ukrainian analysts had identified the shift change pattern at the facility. The security and air defense crews rotated at approximately 2:30 a.m., with a 15 to 20-minute overlap period, during which attention was divided between the outgoing and incoming teams. The Storm Shadow missiles were timed to arrive at the target during this window, when the Panzer S-1 crew was in transition and the facility's local defense was at its least responsive. This level of targeting detail, knowing not just where to strike, but precisely when to strike for maximum effect, was the hallmark of the intelligence operation that made Koval possible. It wasn't just about having Storm Shadow missiles, it was about having the intelligence infrastructure to use them with maximum precision. Real tactics, real consequences. WarfistTV. In the weeks following the strike, the broader strategic picture continued to evolve. Russia's rhetoric about escalation gradually subsided, replaced by quieter efforts to reconstitute the damaged production capability. Satellite imagery from early April 2026 showed construction activity at the Bryansk site, cranes, earth-moving equipment, and what appeared to be prefabricated building sections being transported by rail. Russia was attempting to rebuild, but rebuilding a precision manufacturing facility is not like rebuilding a warehouse. The clean rooms, the calibration equipment, the testing stations, the specialized tooling, all of it required procurement, installation, and validation that could not be rushed without compromising the quality of the components produced. And quality was precisely the issue. If Russia attempted to restart production with substandard equipment or rushed procedures, the resulting guidance units would be unreliable, leading to more missed targets, more wasted missiles, and a further erosion of the Iskander system's battlefield effectiveness. Ukrainian intelligence continued to monitor the site through early April. As of the most recent assessments, production had not resumed. The facility remained a construction zone, not a factory. And every day it remained non-operational was a day that Russia's precision missile stocks continued to deplete without adequate replenishment. For Ukraine's military leadership, the Bryansk strike validated a strategic theory they had been developing since the early days of the war. Direct confrontation with Russia's massive conventional forces along the front line was necessary but attritional. The key to shifting the strategic balance lay in attacking Russia's ability to sustain its military machine, targeting the production chain, the logistics network, the fuel supply, and the command infrastructure that kept the Russian war machine running. Storm Shadow, HIMARS, long-range drones. Each weapon served a different role in this strategy. Storm Shadow provided the precision and penetration capability needed to destroy hardened or high-value targets deep in Russian territory. HIMARS targeted logistics nodes, ammunition depots, and command posts closer to the front. Drones provided persistent harassment, forcing Russia to divert air defense resources and creating the background noise that enabled higher-value strikes. Together, these capabilities formed an integrated deep strike architecture that Russia had not adequately prepared for. Moscow had built its air defense network to counter high-altitude aircraft and ballistic missiles. It was less prepared for the simultaneous challenge of low-flying cruise missiles, swarms of small drones, and precision-guided rockets striking from multiple directions and ranges. The lesson was clear, and military analysts around the world took note. In modern warfare, the production line is the front line. Destroying a factory that builds missile guidance systems can be more strategically significant than destroying a battalion of tanks. The Bryansk strike removed more combat power from Russia's order of battle than most frontline engagements, not by killing soldiers, but by eliminating the weapons those soldiers needed to fight. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. And Operation Koval was proof that Ukrainian military thinking had evolved from tactical adaptation to genuine strategic innovation. Now, let's answer the question from earlier in the video. How many completed Iskander guidance units did the strike destroy? The answer is approximately 30 to 45 units. Answer range closest to option B, 38. Ukrainian intelligence based this estimate on satellite imagery showing the scale of warehouse destruction. combined with known production rates and shipping schedules that indicated the warehouse had received a major delivery batch just days before the strike. At 8 to 10 units produced per month, this represented 3 to 5 months of output eliminated in under 2 minutes of combat. Each guidance unit represented not just material cost, but irreplaceable manufacturing time, time that Russia could not buy, borrow, or steal. 3 questions remain. Was Ukraine's decision to use only 3 Storm Shadow missiles the right choice? Or should they have committed a larger strike package to ensure complete destruction of all 5 buildings in the complex? Could Russia have prevented this strike if its air defense commanders had recognized the drone swarm as a deception operation and maintained defensive orientation toward the Western approach corridor? And what would you have done differently as the Ukrainian planner, or as the Russian air defense commander, who watched 3 cruise missiles slip through a network designed to stop exactly this kind of attack? Subscribe to WarfistTV, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Real tactics, real consequences. The Bryansk industrial zone is quieter now. Construction crews work among the wreckage, but the assembly lines are silent. The clean rooms are open to the sky. The guidance units that were supposed to steer Iskander missiles toward Ukrainian cities are scattered across a charred factory floor, their precision optics shattered, their circuitry melted. And somewhere in western Ukraine, the planners of Operation Koval are already studying the next target. Because in this war, the factory that builds the weapon is just as important as the weapon itself. And Ukraine has proven, again, that it can reach both. The wrecks remain. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. Stay vigilant.